Hey guys, Mark here again from North of the Wall Garage. Hope everyone's doing well. Thought today I would talk about one of my other cars, my 2007 BMW M6. The E60 M5, the E63 M6, and E64 M6 with a convertible top are somewhat of infamous vehicles. There's a lot of information out there on the internet of the common pitfalls and of course rod bearings. That's what everyone always hears, rod bearings, and that affected the same V8 M3 as well. The 4-liter V8 and the 5-liter V10 are really effectively built on like the same block, just extended. A lot of people stay away from these cars because of their fear of maintenance or catastrophic failure, probably more so catastrophic failure. But it's interesting as we look over time, and now since the path to electrification is very clear and forced electrification is very clear, this is the last V10 and the only V10 BMW has ever made, will ever make for production car usage. Similarly, their whole portfolio, they just announced the new M2 coming out as the last fully internal combustion M car available. So as a result, that makes any V10 M5 or V10 M6, I think, an extraordinarily special car. The question is, is there value there today? I think there's a ton of value. And later I'll go through auction results and we can kind of look and compare to similar stories, but I wouldn't be surprised if this car goes the way of the 1990s 8 Series, which had the V12 and an available manual transmission. Those cars for a very long time were very underappreciated for what they were. And now you're seeing crazy values, well into the 6 figures. Getting back to what the V10 experience really is. To me, this is the cheapest way to get into a 6-figure style experience. And what do I mean by that? Well, to get a V10 manual convertible, or just V10 manual in general, you have to step up to a Lamborghini Gallardo or an Audi R8. Those are the most approachable, lowest cost options to get into another V10. And this V10, this isn't like a, this isn't like a Ford Triton V10, I guess, yeah, that's the cheapest option. Buy an F350 from the 90s with the 7-liter, the 7.3-liter V10. But, this isn't a truck V10. This is a race-designed V10 engine. This car is very different than the American V10s, even the Viper or stuff like that. And the Viper's great, I love the Viper, but this is very different, very high revving, 8250 headline. It has 10 throttle bodies, 1 for each cylinder. It has banks of actuators that control the throttle bodies that are flapping up and down depending on how much throttle input there is. There's crazy throttle mapping. They're true 200-mile-per-hour cars with the limiter off. So these are very special cars. In this V10, when you drive it, and I'm in the process of upgrading my audio equipment, but when I'm done with that, I want to post sort of a BMW V10 ASMR video, and you'll see this V10 howls. It's a very beautiful and unique sound, and it's really impressive, especially with a good exhaust on the car. So it's interesting too when you look at, I think something else that drives value is production numbers. Now they made thousands of M5s and M6s with the V10, but most of them, the vast majority of them, had the sequential manual gearbox, the SMG. And the SMG is prone to additional failures, so this car with the manual transmission is actually more reliable just by definition. You don't have the associated pumps that the SMG transmission required. And also you don't have the hard shifting. The SMG was a bit infamous for very hard shifts at low speed, since it's effectively a truly automated manual, whereas this, where I can feather and actuate the clutch myself, it's a much more smooth driving experience. The manual transmission V10s are incredibly rare. This car is one of 350, 360. On the M5, I'm not as sure about the production numbers, but they're similarly low, a little bit higher than the M6, but similarly low. And at the time, the M6 was the fastest production vehicle that BMW had ever made. They're incredibly special cars. The coupe version was the first time they ever rolled out a carbon fiber roof on an M car. There was a lot of firsts with these cars. The other mistake people make, though, is that the M5 and the M6 are kind of the same car. It's just coupe versus sedan. That's actually not true. There's a lot of very bespoke parts that were built for the M6. The M6 was a little bit of a step up from the M5. $10,000, $20,000 more. It came with forged wheels. The M5 had alloys. You could get a full leather interior, every single surface dash, everything wrapped. I don't think the M5 went that far in sort of luxury features. So there's a few other things like that, but they're kind of random. Right on the M6 coupe, you could get the carbon fiber roof, couldn't get such the option on the M5. So there's a few different interesting things like that. Yes, they are similar, but they are different as well, and it's not one for one. It's not like an Audi S4 and S5 or something where they're effectively the same car. It's just two doors versus four doors, or an M3 or M4, 2 doors versus 4 doors. The other thing I want to discuss now is the implication of our future of driving mostly electrified cars and what that means for a car like the V10, M6, M5. Electric cars are always going to be the fastest cars now. We've obviously seen that proven with the Tesla Model S Plaid, other crazy things on the horizon, the Rimac, the tons of different cars, Lucid Sapphire, crazy stuff, right? Acceleration numbers you would never believe. To 80% of people who are into cars, maybe 90%, people just kind of like the newest thing and like the butt feeling, of going crazy fast, and don't really care about any of those X factor items. But to the 10 to 20% of us who do, they will never make cars like this again. Teslas are really fun. I have great friends with performance model Teslas that they're a ton of fun, but the driving experience does leave something to be desired. There's something incredible about getting in this car on a Saturday morning, putting the top down, firing up the V10, hearing it howl, just on the road with the sun streaming in and rowing my own gears, just the connection with the road and the car. It's unlike anything else. And the engine is breathing as I'm driving. You can hear it. You can hear the intake noise. You hear the exhaust noise. As I shift, you hear it go back and forth and breathe and snort. All of that sort of natural emotional connection with the car that the driver is in control of, the driver experiences, is gone with these electric cars. So that's something that I think to keep in mind when purchasing a car like this, or any really special internal combustion car for the future, is that true connection with man and machine. I'm sure there's going to be great electric sports cars in the future. Just released a couple days ago was a Caterham concept, which I think will be really cool. A really interesting study on what electric cars can look like for the sports car space. Obviously, there's the hypercars and the original Tesla Roadster, but those are kind of either absurdly priced, or the Tesla Roadster now is kind of old hat, right? But I think looking forward, there might be some interesting things we'll see. But again, we're never going to have that emotional, row your own, true enthusiast experience. So that's going to drive values, but that also makes you appreciate these moments now where, these cars still aren't that old. They're underpriced. Again, we'll look at auction values. I think it's an exceptional idea and an exceptional time to look at one of these and buying one. I'm going to go through the economics of my particular case and why I selected this model in particular, and the cost of it, how much I put into maintenance thus far, and what I think it's going to take in the future. But with some money, you can get these cars pretty reliable. It just takes a bit of that initial investment, and then you hold them. And I truly think in a couple years, this car could be worth $60,000, $70,000, $80,000. So with that, let's review some auction results and talk about what this car means today and what it can mean in the future. Okay, so now since this video is mostly values focused, I thought it would be interesting to look over some auction data for, we'll focus on the E60 M5, and M6s generally track similarly, maybe a little bit less. Again, we'll just focus on the BMW M5, the E60 for now, since that seems to be the standard bearer for the V10 prices. It's interesting when you look at, I'm on Bring a Trailer right now, we'll look at Cars and Bids as well, kind of being the two leading auction websites. Generally speaking, if you want an SMG transmission, which are prone to more failures and obviously have not aged as well, right? The manual has kind of preserved the historical nature of the car and has made it a relevant experience for today, whereas the SMG, I think, ages the car even more, similar to how you see for certain Ferraris or Porsches with older transmissions, like older automatics, the Ferraris with the old F1 transmission, so like a 360 Modena or F355. Those with the automatics, which were very cutting edge at the time, have actually aged the car very poorly, kind of moving forward into the 2020s. Whereas those examples with the manual transmission, it's preserved it as a classic. And I think that's really the same thing that's happened here with the M5 and the M6, is that the SMG has aged poorly. There are much better automatic options out there now. Even just conventional torque converter, ZF units, or dual clutch. A lot of different better options. And it's kind of interesting. I think even BMW knew that at the time. They produced as a bit of a test run, but then the economy changed. Fuel economy standards were changing. Emission standards were changing. But at one point, they put together an M5 CSL and an M6 CSL. And with these, they were stroked to 5.8 liters. They were really impressive machines. And not only that, but the automatics in these were upgraded to dual clutch units. They were no longer the SMG. So that's kind of interesting to note that even BMW saw the shortcomings of the SMG at the time and looked to, make some edits there in terms of the transmission of the car. So again, getting back to the M5 values, you'll see here any 6-speed example where there isn't a seller that's really questionable and had been lying in this example. But all other examples where you have a 6-speed, you're starting to see values with lower miles, like a 50,000 mile M5 6-speed in the 40s. Not long ago, you could get this car in the 20s. So it's really, I think the manuals are already seeing a bit of a bump in value. The automatics are still kind of what you would expect. Low mile examples do fairly well into the 30s, but any automatic with any sort of miles is still in the 20s, and it'll probably be that way for a long time. If you look at any other like majorly desirable cars where there's a big difference between manual and automatic, not only in the way it's aged and the driving experience, but also in the sense of production numbers. Automatics are much more common than manuals. Automatics are just less valuable. There's more supply. Interesting to see the values, but again, you have a range of values. As you go lower in the miles, you start to see some interesting prices. 75,000 on this 18,000 mile M5 with the 6-speed. 46,000 miles for 42 almost. So the values do vary a bit, right? But they're all a bit higher, and anything that's high on this list was a 6-speed manual car. So you can see like this example, a 10,000 mile example just sold for $127,500 last July. So really interesting to see that. I think what this means for the future of the car, you can kind of see if you were going to plot a line of distribution here, you would see that eventually, right, there's a bit of an uptick. And obviously this is kind of the COVID uptick here. But I think even beyond that, taking into consideration the desirability of this car, I think you're going to see an upward trend. So, and this is typically true, right? When there's the best examples start setting price records, that will filter down to the cars that have, middle to higher mileage, that are the 6-speed manual BMW or BMW M5s or M6s. So very interesting to see that. And it's the same story on cars and bids. The automatic M5s are trading for, 20s, the best examples into the 30s, the worst examples into the teens. But the manual M5s continue to bring in pretty healthy prices. Here's a manual M5 that just sold a week ago, 60,000 miles just about, sold for almost $44,000. So you're seeing those manual transmission V10 BMWs already go for some healthy values. And again, I think in a year, 2 years, 3 years, the norm will be 60 to 70 for an example like this M5 that's sitting with decent miles. And that's just going to filter down the range. So the 6-speed manual is a little higher miles, maybe coming in that 50 range. And then I would not be surprised if this car goes into the hundreds someday. We're already seeing examples go into the hundreds, but again, I think that would be more and more common. And what I wanted to compare it to was the 850 CSIs of the 90s. So the 850 CSI, it's very interesting when you look at production numbers and compare it to the V10 manual production numbers of the M5 and M6. The 850 CSI was an incredibly rare, low production. It was like 1,200 units for the world, 250 for the US market, V12 optional manual transmission BMW for sale. And I believe this block was also eventually used in the McLaren F1. So it's a very desirable engine block, a very desirable engine configuration, and a really cool history to this car. I also, it's also 90s chic with the pop-up headlights and the kind of the slant nose body. It looks very nice, right? It's a neat looking car. So you'll see here though, lower mile examples that are 6-speed manual are now trading in the 200s. So this car has had a similar journey, I think, to the V10 BMWs, just shifted forward, right? Several years. So these 90s BMWs were undesirable in the early 2000s, and then people have kind of caught on, and today they're bringing in 6-figure values on the regular. And again, the best lowest mile examples are approaching $200,000. Now, to compare to production numbers, when we look at the 850 CSI, again, at that 1,200 or so units made for the world, 250 for the US, the V10 production numbers aren't that crazily off. You will see that the E60 M5 sedan, there were 1364 examples produced with the 6-speed manual transmission gearbox. The M6 had 701 examples produced. So interestingly, the M6 is actually more rare, but you'll see the values are slightly lower when you compare to the M5, and we can go through that in another video if people are interested in that.
But generally speaking, the M5 is the model and a little bit more timeless. And I say this as an M6 owner. The M6 values are still a little bit low as compared to the M5, but they track pretty closely. But then when you look at the 850 CSI production numbers, the number of manual 850 CSIs are 1,510. And of those, there were 250 that were shipped to the United States. Not so different than the V10 manual production numbers for the M5 and M6. And I think this is the direction that we're going to go. So this remains one of the more interesting bargains on the market today, is a car that could really potentially appreciate significantly in value. Values have been suppressed for a long time around concerns around maintenance, and I sort of made a joke about that earlier in the video. But the reality is, these cars can get figured out pretty quickly with a few key items: rod bearings, Vanos lines, throttle actuators, fuel injectors sometimes. And that's really it if you have a manual transmission car. So there's a handful of items you got to figure out. Hopefully, the more difficult items to figure out are actually not mechanical at all. It's when there's just these classic German car electrical issues that are a little bit frustrating. But I really think that this car, we're looking 3, 4, 5 years down the road, I think you will start to see many more instances of six-figure cars coming across the block. So if you're interested in buying a very unique sports car that will never be made again, we're in changing times. It's going to be impossible to get a V10 engine in any car new coming up. That will happen very soon. This is a great option of a vehicle that will appreciate, I think, while you hold it. You can enjoy it, put some miles on it, do the maintenance. Don't defer the maintenance. That was a classic thing. These cars got into the hands of people who were deferring maintenance. Don't defer maintenance anymore. Change the oil every 3,000 miles. Do the rod bearings. Do the actuators. Do the Vanos lines. I think you're going to be in great shape. That's what I hope to do with my own M6, and that's something that I think will be very interesting to see in a few years is, what's that car going to be worth? So when I go to sell that in a few years, or maybe I'll hold on to it, who knows? I kind of like the idea of collecting these V10s. I think they're incredible cars. Could be really interesting to see the value there. So there you have it. I continue to think the BMW M5 and M6 manual transmission cars will continue to increase in value with the V10 engines. We'll see. It'll be interesting to see over the next few years. But in the meantime, like and subscribe. I appreciate all the great feedback on these videos. It's really interesting to see, and critical feedback. I'm interested in what you guys want to see coming up, and we'll focus on more high action videos as well, working on an audio setup to capture more engine sound and do more fun things. So looking forward to having you along for the ride. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.